Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're back now with Senator Bernie Sanders, who joins us from Greenfield, Iowa. Senator, I want to pick up where we left off on the issue of gun control. You said now you do support more efforts to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, but you have in the past been skeptical of federal gun control. You voted against the Brady bill in 2003 and 2005. You voted for a law to shield gun manufacturers. And I'm wondering how you explain your change of heart.
Well, I think, first of all, for 30 years, I've been advocating for the ban on assault weapons. Year after year, I have an F voting record from the NRA. I think the last one was a D-. And as president, I'm confident that I'll have an F-. The world has changed in 30 years, and even in rural states, like my state of Vermont, which until last year had virtually no gun control, the people of this country are sick and tired of seeing the horrific mass murders that we have been seeing year after year, most recently in Dayton and El Paso. And the American people want us to stand up to the NRA. The American people want strong gun control legislation. I have demanded that Mitch McConnell do the right thing, do what the American people want. Bring us back to Washington right now. Let's pass what was passed in the House. Let us go further. So to answer your question, Margaret, over the last 30 years, the world has changed. It has changed in rural states like mine, and it has changed all over this country.
How do you protect civil liberties and do things like Congressman Scalise advocated, which is giving law enforcement more tools to root out those who might carry out these killings?
Well, it's not only giving law enforcement more tools. We have got to do a lot better job than we are doing right now in fighting the rise of white nationalism in this country. We need to understand that in El Paso, what was committed was an act of domestic violence. And we need to be much more aggressive than the Trump administration has in going after those people. So I am a strong civil libertarian. But on the other hand, I want to make sure that we do not see the rise of neo-fascism in this country, and that we understand that those white nationalists are, in fact, when they get involved in violence, they are terrorists, and they should be treated as terrorists.
And you support red flag laws?
Yes, I do. I do.
Okay. All right. Senator, thank you for joining us from the trail.
Thank you.
We turn now to Colorado Senator Michael Bennet. He joins us from the Iowa State Fair in Des Moines. Good morning, Senator. It looks like a lot of fun there right behind you.
Good morning. It is unbelievably fun. We actually just finished singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Everybody stopped and put their hand on their heart and sang it together.
All right. Well, you tweeted this week that if you are elected, you promise voters that they won't have to think about you for at least 2 weeks. Is it a hard strategy to try to get people to be passionate about being moderate?
I think that people are so sick and tired of waking up in Donald Trump's reality TV show. I think they're sick of a president who's dividing us. I mean, it's very clear what he's trying to do. He acquired power by dividing the American people against themselves. He's trying to hold on to the power by doing the same thing. And every day he just tries to keep the reality TV show alive. I think Americans want to go on with their lives. They want to build their businesses. They want to raise their children. They don't want to wake up, feeling like we're on the cusp of some crazy new thing with North Korea or Iran, or that, the president is tweeting out conspiracy theories about somebody who killed themselves in New York. They want a president who's actually doing their job so they can do their job, confident that we leave the country in a better place for our kids and grandkids, and confident that we've situated America's leadership in this world again. So that's what I meant by that. I think that people can check in every 2 weeks and see how I'm doing.
Colorado, where you're from, is a state that has a lot of gun owners, but it's also experienced horrific gun violence. And they've made some changes at the state level. Is that essentially what the country should be talking about? Because it doesn't seem that anything gets through Congress right now.
I think that is what we should be talking about. My oldest daughter is 19. She was born the year after the Columbine massacre happened in my state. And my state, which is a Western state, a Second Amendment state, we passed the background checks that are waiting for Mitch McConnell to put on the floor this summer. And over that course of that almost 20 years, every year, about 2 or 3% of the people that try to buy a gun in Colorado can't buy a gun. And they're murderers, and they're domestic abusers, and they're convicted felons of violent crimes. There's nobody who could defend any of those people having a firearm. If we can do it in Colorado, certainly we could do it nationally.
But you don't expect that to happen in September? You don't expect a vote on
Well, I
background
hope that it will
checks?
happen. I hope it will happen, but I believe what Mike Bloomberg said earlier on your show, which is that the politics of this issue are changing in part because the tragedies are mounting up, which is a terrible way for us to deal with it, but also because the public is being galvanized by organizations like the kids from Parkland and the Moms Against Guns, and that's making a difference. And if it does not come to the floor, we need to make sure that every week between now and November, we're making this a voting issue. I'm not saying just the politicians, I mean all of us are making this a voting issue so that people that refuse to let the American people have a vote on the floor are turned out and replaced with people who will take the vote. I mean, we're not even, like, McConnell can vote however he wants, but why doesn't he just put it on the floor so that every senator can be held accountable for their vote?
You've been talking about ending hyperpartisanship. Do you think it is helpful for Democrats and your fellow candidates to be linking the president to these mass murders?
Well, here's what I think. I think Donald Trump, as I said, it has a strategy that is to divide the country so he can win. He believes there are enough people out there, he thinks it's 38 or 39 or 40%, that can keep him in office if the rest of us are not paying attention and not as strategic. And I don't think we can play into that. We have to unify this country. That is what the people of Iowa want, the people of Colorado want, in South Carolina and New Hampshire. We have to unify this country to close over a broken Washington and to close over a president who is a guy who is, goes to our worst impulses rather than our best impulses every single day of the year. We have both in our country. We've got best impulses, with times we have our worst impulses. I think we should have a president who asks us to do our best. And I think we have to have a president who asks us to come together.
All right, Senator, thank you. And I think I hear a child behind you, so nice focus. It's a fair.
It's not my child, though. So,
all right. Well, good luck to the parents. All right, thank you very much, Senator.
Thanks
we'll
so
be
much.
right back with another
Thanks,
2020 candidate. We're back with New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. She joins us this morning from the campaign trail in West Des Moines. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning.
You support universal background checks, a ban on large magazine and assault weapons, and an anti-gun trafficking law. You need Republican votes to get all those things through Congress. What can actually pass now?
You know, I think things are changing since kids have been marching out of their schools and marching on Washington and are really demanding action. You've seen a level of advocacy that I've never seen before. And I think if Mitch McConnell would have the courage to call us back into Washington to vote, we would pass the universal background checks bill that's already passed the House. And we would pass the bill that I wrote, which is anti-gun trafficking, which the last time we voted on it got 58 votes. We only needed 60, so we're only 2 votes shy. And I believe we have the momentum and the advocacy behind us today to pass that as well.
What about red flag laws? Your colleague in New York, Chuck Schumer, has said they are ineffective cop-outs.
I think you can pass a red flag law, but it's insufficient. What we really need to do is also pass a ban on assault weapons, particularly the military-style weapons that have resulted in people losing their lives within seconds, and then the large magazines.
Many of your Republican colleagues would agree on red flags being insufficient. They also don't think background checks necessarily would be. The argument is for more tools for law enforcement. So do you support making domestic terrorism a federal crime, and would you sign on to Dick Durbin's bill to increase resources to combat it?
Absolutely. And as president, I would direct my Department of Justice to investigate white supremacy and other domestic terrorist groups, to infiltrate them, to make sure we know if they're planning attacks, and to absolutely combat white supremacy in society, because these groups are domestic terrorists.
So in talking about white supremacy, you and some of your colleagues and competitors have been linking the president's rhetoric to emboldening white supremacists. You said he is emboldening white supremacists his entire presidency and his campaign. Are you actually saying that President Trump is responsible for the killings in El Paso and Ohio?
What I'm saying is that his words have consequences. And the words he has been using have been hateful and divisive and racist, and has truly emboldened white supremacy and hate crimes across this country. Since President Trump's been elected, hate crimes have increased, certainly across my state and across the country, against all groups. More racism, more anti-Semitism, more white supremacy, more anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-refugees. And it's changing who we are as a nation, and that's one of the reasons I'm running for president. We need a president who will bring us back together again.
In terms of the name calling and putting it in the political context, don't you think that is ratcheting up the rhetoric rather than having cooler heads prevail?
What President Trump has done is ratchet up the rhetoric. When he's at a rally in Florida and someone says, "What are you going to do with immigrants?" and someone shouts, "Kill them, shoot them," President Trump laughed. So he is not leading us in the right direction. He has used words like infestation. He's used words like invasion. That is creating a climate where people are literally today fueled by anger and hate. They are hunting down other people using weapons of war. That's what we're up against right now. And President Trump will not stand up to the NRA, will not stand up to the gun manufacturers get these guns off the streets.
Well, what about, though, what Joaquin Castro, the congressman, did this week with publishing the names of some of President Trump's top donors? It's publicly available information, but some would say he was targeting these individuals. Is that helpful, or is that dangerous, given what you're describing?
Those are his choices, not mine. I will call out racism when I see it. I will call out white supremacy when I see it. I will call out hate, and I will stand up against it in every form.
I want to ask you about New York financier Jeffrey Epstein. He is an accused child molester, pedophile, sex trafficker. He committed suicide while in federal custody. The FBI and IG are investigating. Do you think the U.S. government has failed his victims?
Well, I'm concerned. These survivors deserved a day in court. They deserved justice. They deserve to speak out against this perpetrator. And it is a shame that he committed suicide. I do think there needs to be a full investigation about why he was taken off the why he was taken off the suicide watch list. I think it's a strange decision given that he attempted suicide once already. I want to know why he was left in a circumstance where suicide was even possible. I think it needs a full investigation.
Senator Gillibrand, thank you. We'll be back in a moment. We're back now with our political panel. Gerald Seib is the executive Washington editor for the Wall Street Journal, and Shawna Thomas is the Washington bureau chief for Vice News. Out in the field this morning, our CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who is still out at the Iowa State Fair. Ed, tell me, you've been listening to all the candidates out there speak about promising some kind of gun control, either now or if they're elected. Is there any chance any of it gets through?
You know, Margaret, I've been covering this issue in one way or another for 6 or 7 years, since Sandy Hook, essentially. We go through a week of this, we hit a weekend, and then it struggles to sustain itself, the debate. And that's one of the things I'm very curious to watch in the next few days, is can this issue get into its second week since a big mass shooting and sustain itself. And there's some evidence that, at least here in Iowa, a critical early caucus state, that it might. Just a little while ago, Julian Castro, one of the candidates who spends a lot of time here, said that this Wednesday he'll be holding a forum with members of that organization that held the larger forum yesterday here in Des Moines to talk specifically about his gun violence plan and ways to somehow curb violence across the country. It'll happen in a small bedroom community that is popular with younger families, young couples out in eastern Iowa. If that organization can continue to hold those kinds of events with candidates over the course of the next 6 months here and in New Hampshire and in South Carolina and other states, maybe it does sustain itself. But when that congressional debate happens in September, if it happens at all, I suspect it's going to look very similar to what's happened before. Promises of action that fall apart over the details and the concerns from either party that they may be giving away too much.
Shawna, our CBS News polling shows that there is some data to back up what the candidates are saying in terms of shifting public sentiment. 6 out of 10 Democrats polled by CBS say they want things like background checks. Majority of Republicans and Democrats are open to more action on this front. But what's different this time is always the question.
I think that's a good question. It is really hard not to be a little bit cynical. Sandy Hook, 20 kids died. They weren't able to do all of that much afterwards. I think the difference is, one, the NRA doesn't have as much money as they used to. And two, there are Republicans who are trying to engage in this conversation. There's only so many times people can die. And I do think the president saying, okay, let's talk about background checks. Now, we don't know if he's going to actually follow through with that. Always hard to tell with this president. And then hearing McConnell say on the radio, Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell say on the radio, okay, we can maybe have this conversation when we come back. At least that's happening. But remember, when Manchin and Toomey had their bill that was a smaller bill about background checks, after Sandy Hook, there were 4 Republicans who voted for it in the Senate. 2 of those Republicans are not in the Senate anymore. So the question is, how much money does the NRA raise out of this, and how scared are Republicans to actually have this conversation?
And we didn't hear from Congressman Scalise, who is the whip, really any promise of anything that would be voted for. He seemed to say there are a lot of tools already there. They just need to be used better by law enforcement.
Yeah, so I think the question is very much open. Will attention stay on this issue, as Ed suggested, or does the circus move on to the next town? One of the things that might be different, to your point, is that for years and years, the passion on the gun issue was on the pro-gun side, not the people who favor gun control. People who wanted guns are more passionate about that issue than the other side. That might have switched in 2018. I think we'll find out now for sure whether that's the case or not. But this is not really a complicated equation. This comes down to 2 men. This comes down to the President Trump and to Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate. He says he will not bring up a bill on the Senate that the president won't sign. So will the president convince people he wants a background bill that he will sign? That's the only question that really matters, in a sense.
Sorry, Ed, I wanted to ask you, one of the things that is different is this overlay of racial politics as well. The fact that the killer in El Paso said he specifically went to target Mexicans, and that this was the largest attack on the Latino community this country has ever seen. Does that overlay of a hate crime change things?
I think it does to some extent, especially because it happened in such a border community that is defined by its Latino heritage, and the fact, frankly, that one of the presidential candidates is from there, Beto O'Rourke. He was able to help draw even more attention to this, perhaps, than it would have gotten otherwise. There's been a lot of debate in the past week about, is this just a gun debate, or does this also have to be a conversation about the fact that this was the largest anti-Latino attack, essentially, in modern history? And I've talked to some colleagues, and I asked Julian Castro the other day when he was here whether or not he thought the nation's response had been proper. He thought to some extent it had, but I got a sense from him that perhaps it could have been a little stronger, or there could have been more conversation about that. But I think it absolutely helps fuel the conversation, because race is, will be, and probably should continue to be part of the conversation in this campaign, given the fact that you have so many historic candidates running, given that the Democratic Party continues to have this debate over where exactly it should be campaigning for votes in order to win back the White House. Do you focus on southern states with younger and more minority populations? Do you come back to here in the Midwest and try to drive up the numbers among white working class voters? Although if you were to come to Iowa, you'd find a growing percentage of Latino people here. So it's an argument that has a double relevance, certainly over the past week, and candidates knew that.
Shawna, Joe Biden had a few missteps this week. Steve Scalise, in this interview on our show, hit him on a few of those things. But one of them was also, he seemed to say something to the effect of poor kids are just as good as white kids. The right jumped on him for that.
Yeah, and here's the deal. Joe Biden is an older person, and sometimes he is going to say things that sound like mistakes. That is something that he and his campaign are going to have to deal with, because in the world we currently live in, with social media, 24-hour cable news, everything else, every little thing you do is going to be under a microscope, and Republicans are going to jump on him for that. I think it is clear what he was trying to say. I don't think he was trying to, in any way in this type of commentary, be racist or anything like that, but this is a problem they're going to have to continue to deal with, and it's going to happen in debates. He's just going to have to figure out how to speak a little bit more carefully.
Jerry, when you look at what happened this week in the escalation of the trade war, there are some Republicans who are nervous that the president is hurting his chances at re-election if his bet does not pay off.
Well, it's an interesting situation, because this is actually an issue, the trade fight with China in particular, where the president has some bipartisan support. Chuck Schumer's warning to the president a few months ago was, don't go soft on China. So up to this point, he's got a lot of Republican support, a fair amount of business community support, and some Democratic support. But a lot of that support is basically premised on the idea that the trade wars will be temporary and that they'll be contained. And this is the week where I think it started to look as if, wait, this might get out of control and it might go on for a long time. And I think some people who are with the president now on trade didn't sign up for a long trade war. They signed up for a short tariff fight. And if that's not what it is, I think it becomes very problematic for the president, or at least potentially so. And
those farmers in Iowa want to know what the future holds for them. I mean, we've talked to a lot of farmers in Iowa on Vice News who are basically saying, okay, I'm willing to go with the president because I do think we need to stand up to China, but if I don't have some consistency soon, I don't know how to make decisions about my business, and I'm going to lose money, and that's scary.
And it's interesting that if you look at the numbers, the trade deficit actually went up in the first 6 months of this year. It's bigger now. It's 8% bigger than it was a year ago. So you have to ask the question, is this working? Is this trade war working? It was supposed to bring the trade deficit down. So I think it's a very tricky time. We may be at a bit of an inflection point for President Trump on the trade issue.
It's something we'll watch. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to Ed out in Iowa. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.